the judiciary and the correction systems in Mexico. The last thing a Mexican drug trafficking cartel would want would be for drugs to be legalized in the United States, because that would take away their primary source of income.
How do you kill a cartel and the street gang organization in drugs? You take their source of nutrition away. Their source of nutrition is money, drug money. You dry them up.
The idea that you're going to be able to somehow or another make marijuana illegal and it's not going to have some impact on organized crime is so fucking dumb. It's childish.
This prohibition allows them to flourish. I mean, it did with alcohol.
When prohibition was going on and the mafia and Al Capone and all them motherfuckers was in control, they ran that shit.
The American people soon came to understand that prohibition of alcohol brought greater harm than the abuse of alcohol.
The current prohibition on the marijuana laws makes everything more dangerous.
$370 billion a year go into underworld's pockets, and bad people with that kind of money can do horrendous things.
If marijuana prohibition isn't achieving the goals we think it should, what has caused it to be pursued the way it has? What are the elements that keep it propped up? And where did it all start? While most fingers might point to the year 1937 when marijuana was first outlawed by a tax stamp required for hemp, let's fast forward 34 years to 1971. That was the year the public first heard this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with bipartisan leaders. America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse.
Attorney General Kleindienst for Nixon was quoted thereafter, and he was sorrowful that he had been involved in this. He said that they knew in the Nixon administration that drug treatment works and incarceration does not, but the enormous political benefit by declaring a war on drugs that can't really fight back. He said they chose the incarceration route for political reasons and then were absolutely overwhelmed at the positive political benefits that they received for doing that.
There's actual documentation that shows the United States government under Nixon was actively writing to universities and saying, pull your information of cannabis and hemp and marijuana out of your libraries. Literally, purge it.
So it took from about 1972, 71, 72, to the late 1970s to create this myth that marijuana would lead to using harder substances. Once that myth was established, then the numbers exploded, and you go to Congress and get money.
I am glad that in this administration we have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year. This is one area where we cannot have budget cuts because we must wage what I have called total war against public enemy #1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Most law enforcement agencies before the 1970s had very small narcotic units because narcotics wasn't seen as a big problem. By the end of the decade, the narcotic units had exploded. Federal money came in. And then Ronald Reagan came.
Tonight, I can report to you that we've made much progress. 37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
Whenever we hear the word war on anything, I think it should alert our antenna that a mind management game is going on.
Well, what is meant by the war on drugs? That's a very good question. I mean, how can you have a war on a noun? It's a bit like, again, the war on terror. It's a war on a concept.
We humans are very motivated by war. We are extremely motivated by a metaphor of violent confrontation. It goes all the way back to the very first foremothers of all life on Earth, bacteria, 3.85 billion years ago. Bacteria are incredibly social. They live in armies. They live in armies of 7 trillion. And they are constantly communicating with each other. They're constantly exchanging data. It's a little information processing network. But what happens when 2, 3, 4, or 7 colonies of bacteria all discover the same food source. They make war. What motivates ants? They go about doing their daily business all of the time, but when an alarm pheromone hits that indicates there's been an invasion from outside the colony, whammo, everybody drops what they're doing. Everybody rushes to the site of the breach where the odor, the alarm pheromone is coming from. I mean, we humans, we're the children of bacteria. We humans, we're the cousins of ants. Just tell us there's an outsider at the gates. You use the metaphor of war for just about anything, and it gets us roused. But especially use it about our group versus another group, our subculture versus another subculture, and you can really get us going.
It's clear neurolinguistic programming, because if you associate war, you associate it with a nation having to pull together to fight a baddie out there.
Now, some folks will tell you that I'm dealing in poison, but hey, do I look like the kind of guy that would do that to a kid like you? Yes.
It's a rhetorical frame in which the sacrifice of individual liberty seems necessary. This is what's needed to win the war.
Last year alone, over 10,000 drug criminals were convicted, and nearly $250 million of their assets were seized by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. These are a measure of our commitment and emerging signs that we can defeat this enemy.
Astounding thing about the war on drugs is how long it's gone on and how little progress has been made.
When I was working for MI5, I had my first sort of inkling that all was not good, because I was working on the Irish terrorist logistics desk, which is a movement of people and weapons into and out of the UK. And of course, doing that, I had to work very closely with customs, which is there to try and stop the drugs coming into the UK. They just knew it was like looking for the needle in a haystack just to try and stop these drugs flooding into the UK.
I had record-breaking arrests. I had record-breaking interdiction of supply, but it didn't make one iota of difference.
You don't see us knocking off the big guys so often that, you know, there's scarcity of drugs. When was the last time you couldn't cop marijuana in this country? I mean, there's panic in Needle Park. There's no marijuana out there. My God, what am I going to do?
I don't think you could go into any high school in the country. I don't think you could go into any small town in this country. I don't think you could go into any prison in this country and not find marijuana if you were looking for it. So the argument that marijuana prohibition has had any impact on the availability of the drug, I think really doesn't hold water.
What we see are a regular meal of arrest and how many bales of this or kilos of that.
The showing tells us the glamour side of it.
Look at this. All of this pot found inside one semi-truck, 20,000 pounds worth. Border Patrol calling it the biggest bust in our state's history.
You wheel out your 60, 70, 80 kilos of marijuana, your 2 assault rifles. The thing of it is, if you took the average show and tell from the average arrest, you'd have some little kid, I mean, he might be 15, 17, 18, 20 years old, and you would proudly display a small bag of marijuana on your table and say, "We got him. We got him."
Came from Ontario, Oregon into Idaho with some mushrooms and some weed, and I got caught with an exhaust, so he pulled me over. He put his head in the window, said he smelled it, he didn't need a dog, so I just handed it to him just to get it over with.
It's such a joke to say that they're going after hardcore criminals. About 1.5 million arrests on drug-related offenses in the year 2011. About 50% were for marijuana use.
It's practically legal. I get that all the time, especially here in California. And what I say to those people is it's absolutely not practically legal. It's very, very federally illegal.
Just an ongoing story that at this point, really, it seems little more than the premise for television shows.
Synthetic marijuana, dangerous, deadly, illegal. Tonight, the county's top cop says much of this stuff was being made in the back of that plaza.
They got away with it for a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're not going to get away with it for very long.
There's another aspect